Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TarHillIllustrated.com. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he so often does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And Andrew, Carolina just released their schedule today, Thursday, for the 2021 football season, and we're here to break that down, go talk a little bit about some of the matchups and how we see this kind of schedule shaking out for the 21 Tar Heels. And like we always do, man, let's jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick run through of the schedule so everybody can see who the Tar Heels are facing out up in 2021. Starting off the season away at Virginia Tech, and they've got Georgia State and Virginia at home, followed by a trip to Atlanta to face Georgia Tech, then 3 home games in a row against Duke, Florida State, and Miami, followed by an away trip to South Bend to face Notre Dame. I'm sure that game will be scheduled on the Tar Heel, or we circled, on the Tar Heels schedule. And they're home against Wake Forest, at Pittsburgh, home against Wofford, and wrap up the season against NC State in Raleigh. AJ, I look at this schedule. I tweeted it out about 30 minutes ago as well, but for me, it's a relatively favorable schedule. I mean, you've got some tough games in there at Notre Dame. I think at Virginia Tech to start the season is always going to be tricky, although we don't really know what Virginia Tech's going to be like next season with the amount of guys that are kind of leaving that program. And then you're also looking, Miami at home is always a tough game. But I think overall, looking at this schedule, and feel free to disagree with me, I think it kind of, I think it sits in Carolina's favor a little bit. It's not as daunting as I thought it might be, in that we've seen some Carolina schedules be in the past. Would you agree with that?
I would say so. I would say not as daunting given the expectations people have for UNC.
Mm-hmm.
An average UNC team would find this to be a rather difficult schedule. Many of them have been in the past, but this is not going to be a typical UNC team, at least on paper going in. It's not going to be. A couple of things that jumped out to me. Opening at Virginia Tech is kind of cool.
I do. I like that.
The Hokies have played conference games to open the season before. I remember covering a game they played at NC State, I think on a Sunday night one time. And I think I did a Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech game one time up in Blacksburg to open the season. I think it's cool. If you're going to give the Carolina Virginia Tech game in Blacksburg a ton of importance, play it in the opener. Because we don't know what the Hokies are going to be. But the Hokies will enter the season still with some national cachet. They still got some national brand. And that will be a big deal. That's a game that will get a lot of eyeballs, because this season for Carolina is about living up to expectations and getting eyeballs. And they got a few eyeball opportunities during the course of the season, and they get to open things up in that kind of situation where a lot of people are going to be watching, a lot of curious eyeballs want to see what this Heisman front runner looks like, and want to see what Mac Brown's team looks like in this club that's in the top 10, which is probably where they'll start. A couple other things that jump out at me. 6 of the first 7 games are conference games.
Yeah.
And one of those games is, and then later on when they play non-conference games, remember they got Wake as a non-conference game. Mm-hmm. So 6 of the first 7 are league games. 3 of the last 5 are non-conference game, included is the Wake Forest game. People need to remember that this is the second part of a home-and-home non-conference schedule that Wake and Carolina put together, because they weren't playing each other enough through the natural ACC schedule, because Wake's in the other division. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to get some more games in with each other. And this past season's game, all that stuff is just, take it all and put it on the side. It had nothing to do with any of the consistency of the schedules, obviously, because they had to throw stuff together. So that didn't count as part of the home and home series. So also they go to Pittsburgh on a Thursday night.
That's a little tricky. Mm-hmm.
Okay. This will be the 4th straight trip to Pittsburgh on a Thursday night. Mm-hmm. They don't want AJ to sleep, because I fly up for the game. I go to the stadium, cover the game, and then head to the airport and fly home at like 6 o'clock.
You saw that one. You were like, come on, man.
It is what it is. But Thursday nights in November, and it's really, really cold up there.
Oh, yeah, frigid. Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting. Pitt ought to be pretty good. The Tar Heels, I think, are 2-1 in those Thursday night games up there, but they've all been competitive. All the games with Pitt are competitive. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a tricky game at the time of year that it comes. And it's a short break in between, because they have Wake on a Saturday, and the Thursday they have to go to Pitt for a game in a very cold place. They have 3 games that are not on Saturdays, which means with the open date, they have 4 Saturdays that they won't play, which is good for some of us, because we like to watch college football on Saturdays. So I like the way the schedule lays out. You get a big game to open things up. You take care of Virginia early on in the schedule. Miami and Notre Dame, or Florida State, Miami, and Notre Dame, from a historical perspective, looks like wow.
Yeah.
What I also find interesting, Jacob, and you didn't read Miami's schedule, but they play Miami on October 16th. Miami, the week before, Carolina hosts Florida State. However, Miami plays September 30th against Virginia, and they don't play again until they go to Chapel Hill on the 16th. Oh, wow.
That's a big break.
So they're going to have a lot of time to stew over what happened in Miami Gardens back in December when the Tar Heels went and just mauled them. So that'll be very, very interesting, and that'll be another hype game. So if you look at the eyeball games, open up the year at Virginia Tech, lots of eyeballs, okay? Miami on October 16th, lots of eyeballs. Then the Heels get an open date and go to South Bend. Lots of eyeballs. So Carolina could go into November having proven its worth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sam maybe being the front runner for the Heisman. And what do you got after that? You got a difficult game at Pitt. And then what could be a really difficult game, maybe an eyeball game in Raleigh. NC State had a really good team this past year. The Wolfpack should be good again. When people look at the schedule and say there aren't that many marquee games, that has the potential to being a really, really big game that will generate a lot more eyeballs outside the state than it usually does.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if they take care of business, you got Clemson sitting there in Charlotte probably. So I think there are enough opportunities to generate the kind of respect that they need if they want to contend for the CFP. And also there are enough games on here that this program should have a pretty good winning season. I think they should win 9 or 10 games, no doubt.
Yeah, I agree. And then, like you said about that state game, that last one to wrap up, that's a Friday night game as well. So, a lot of that's going to be probably the main game on TV that night. So a lot of national attention will probably be on that one as well. And like you said, if Carolina takes care of business like you would expect them to do, if they can go to Notre Dame and get that, and maybe they're sitting undefeated going into that game, that'll be such a huge game. Rivalry, Carolina looking to kind of reach that ACC championship game and potentially, compete for a spot in the Final Four. So that game could be huge, and that'll definitely be a fun one to watch, depending on how the schedule shakes out and how Carolina obviously does. But yeah, I think it's well, – go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, well, part of Mac's process here and Jeremy Sharp's process is to build the brand of the program.
For sure.
Well, this past year – they were exclusive national TV at Florida State on ABC. They got that again on ABC. They had Fowler and Herbstreit for Notre Dame. They had Fowler and Herbstreit 2 weeks later for Miami. Then they had the Orange Bowl. So that's four exclusive national TV games. If you include ESPN in a primetime slot, at Virginia Tech is going to be one of those games. Okay, when Miami comes in, that's going to be one of those games. They go to Notre Dame, that's going to be one of those games on NBC. And NC State's going to be one of those games. So that's 4 opportunities at least. And at Pittsburgh on ESPN on a Thursday night. Now, of course, they'll go up against the NFL, but the World Series will be behind them. So if they're really, really good, the college football people are going to watch them that night. And then you got Clemson in the ACC championship game if they get that far. So they have a lot of opportunities to build their brand with being on exclusive national TV in some form and having a lot of people watch them when they're either the only game or one of the few games going on. So, this season is really big as far as can they meet expectations? Can Sam really challenge for the Heisman? Carolina's only had one guy finished in the top 2 of the voting. Choo-Choo Justice did it back-to-back years. And nobody did it again for their 60 years when Darren McFadden of Arkansas finished back-to-back. So Sam has a chance to do that. And this is all about, putting another footprint into the college football landscape. And that's what they want to achieve here. How much of that can they do this year? I think the schedule and the TV opportunities give them an amazing opportunity to really, plant a flag in the soil and say, yes, we are taking the next step forward as a college football program that people around the nation must pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said in the beginning, I think the schedule really sets up well for Carolina overall. I mean, we've seen so many times in recent history as well. Even last year, the original schedule, Carolina's been accustomed to kind of open up the season or first or second game, kind of in a neutral site against a bigger opponent, Chick-fil-A kickoff game. We've seen that a lot over the past few years. Carolina was obviously supposed to do that with UCF and then Auburn at their original schedule. That didn't end up happening last year, obviously, but we don't see that here. But, I mean, Virginia Tech away on a Thursday night is still a big game. I know it's not, a neutral site game against an SEC team, but still that's a tough game to start out. AJ, I want to ask you one more thing.
Well, let me comment on that real fast. Yeah. I think that makes it a bigger game. If they would have played Virginia Tech on a Saturday afternoon on October 6th,
it definitely does.
wouldn't generate that much attention. And by then, if the Hokies are 2-3, it wouldn't be as big a deal. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a bigger deal being the opener. And I'll also go on record as saying that, I'd thrown out there on the message boards here the last couple of weeks saying, it wouldn't surprise me maybe if they find a way to work in another game. Mm-hmm. Because you got Georgia State that doesn't wow people. You got Wofford. I'm not playing FCS teams. Mac has kind of said before he's not really a big fan of it either, especially in the week before the rivalry game. But that's kind of the way things are. Certainly the rule of law in the SEC, basically.
Not lying about that.
But I don't think it's necessary now because of the way this lays out. Mm-hmm. And because they get to open at Virginia Tech, you're not going to then want to play one of those neutral site games the week after that. So that's not going to happen, obviously. Yeah. This is the schedule. It would surprise me now if there was another change made. I personally would like to see that because I'd like to see them bolstered a little bit more.
Yeah, a little bit bigger of a game, yeah.
Especially considering the fact that Florida State's not what Florida State was. If this was a typical Florida State going to Virginia Tech, hosted Florida State, you got Miami on there, going to Notre Dame, and at Pitt and NC State in November with the kind of teams they could have, that'd be plenty good enough. And then, of course, Clemson in the ACC title game if they got that far. Florida State isn't what it has been. I do expect the Seminoles to be better.
Yeah,
but sure. Look, if they take care of business in South Bend and in Charlotte, it won't matter.
Exactly.
They will have proven themselves.
Exactly. AJ, last thing I want to kind of ask you about before we wrap this thing up. What do you we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what do you think the toughest stretch is for Carolina during this schedule? I kind of look at it. At first, I was kind of like maybe it's that Florida State, Miami, Notre Dame kind of series. But then, like you mentioned, Florida State, we don't really know how they're going to be. I expect them to be better, but they're not the Florida State of old. So I've kind of changed my mind looking at it. And for me, feel free to disagree. I think the toughest part of this schedule probably comes you play Miami at home on October 16th, then you go to South Bend the following week. Or excuse me, that's actually 14 days later. So you got a bye week going into that one. But you go to Notre Dame. Then you've got Wake Forest at home. I know Carolina, Wake Forest hasn't been exceptional, but always a pretty solid club and a team that Carolina, even last year, struggled with at times. And then you go away to Pittsburgh, which historically, Carolina struggled to beat, especially up there. So do you agree that probably is the toughest part of the schedule, or do you look somewhere else and kind of see, another tough stretch for the Tar Heels?
I think the way that games are kind of you get Wake in between at Notre Dame and at Pitt. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You get Wofford in between at Pitt and at State. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of
helps them out a little bit.
There's really no 3-game stretch that jumps out to me, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's the 2-game stretch. I think it's Miami at home when they're coming off 16 days. And then you have 2 weeks where you go to South Bend. And
that's big.
All the hype. There's a really good chance that they're 1, 2, 3. They're 7-0.
Mm-hmm. Very, yeah. Probably should be if we're being honest.
They should be 7-0. Mm-hmm. The amount of hype that they're going to have to deal with, the national media obligations that they're going to have to deal with. Sometimes you just want to get right in and play that game. You want to keep your routine going. An open date before a huge game could be a problem. Mm-hmm. Miami will have to deal with that before going to Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. Carolina's got to deal with that before going to South Bend. And they haven't really been in that situation before. Mac has. Nobody else has. The players haven't. This will be totally new landscape for them. So I think it's not just the fact that it's Miami and then at Notre Dame, but that week in between with all the hype, that's going to increase the challenge, in my opinion. So that will be sort of the seminal stretch of this season. That'll determine whatever kind of team they are going into Thanksgiving, whatever their national worth is, will be determined in that stretch right there.
Yeah.
So that is it to me. It's 3 weeks, but 2 games. And I think all 3 weeks are going to be important and all are going to be very challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at it, 7 home games, 5 away games. So I know from our perspective, Blacksburg, that's a drive. NC State, that's a drive. You're not going to have to do too much traveling next season.
Two flights.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh is a quick in and out.
Drive, you know what I mean?
And Notre Dame, I connect to Chicago and then fly into South Bend at their airport, which is about as big as my house.
Yeah. Pittsburgh, I mean, that's a pretty quick trip for you. I know you said it's annoying on a Thursday night with everything going on, but that's not a long flight. So, I mean, for you at least. I
don't have to pack anything. I just throw my bag over my shoulder and go.
Yeah. I mean, you got to be looking at this and being like, man, I can handle this. You know what I mean?
And look, I have a very quiet, empty airport at 2:30 in the morning. I go through TSA at 2:30 in the morning, the only guy going through when I go up there for those Thursday night games. And I got an empty, quiet airport to get a bunch of work done. So I'm okay with that. I just wish that they would play Pitt at a different time.
Yeah.
Just to change things up. And honestly, the crowds are down on a Thursday night there. I'd like to see Pitt in a typical Saturday atmosphere. I'd like to see a bigger crowd there. The last time Carolina went there in 19, it was a small crowd. It was really cold.
Mm-hmm.
And Tar Heels lost that game, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they remember Anthony Ratliff Williams had a big game up there on a Thursday night a
Huge
couple years
game, yeah.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
But he threw for one, caught one, and ran a kickoff back for a touchdown. I think he was one of the guys in the country to do that in the game that year. So, and then the 15 team had a big game. They really toughed one out when Marquise Switzer had a big play in that game too. So, I would just rather it be a Saturday just to see a fuller, more regular Pitt home environment because they lose on a Thursday night.
Agree. I totally agree on that. Like, you say what you want about Larry Fedora, but the man can beat Pittsburgh. So yeah, it's going to be it. That's going to be
shame on Narduzzi until 19. I guess he finally beat Carolina.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't beat Fedora.
Yeah, no, who would have thought, right? But I think, AJ, I think we can go ahead and wrap this one up, man. Like I said, Carolina, I think overall, I think we can both agree, pretty favorable schedule for the Tar Heels. Obviously, that trip to South Bend will be circled on the schedule, and Virginia Tech to open the season on a Thursday night in Blacksburg is going to be a big game as well. So, but I think if you're Carolina, you're looking at this, and for what
you're looking at 10-2.
Exactly.
Based on expectations, based on what they have on paper, you're looking at 10-2, 11-1.
Very realistic.
It could be 12-0. We don't know. I'm never a guy I'm not a big fan of projecting something that hasn't been done.
I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm. So they were 8-4 this past year. They were much better 8-4 than they were 7-6 a year before. But they were still 8-4. They're still climbing. Mm-hmm. They're not at the peak. They haven't summited the mountain yet. They're still on the way up. So projecting, even 11-1, you got to figure they're going to stumble somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And going to Notre Dame's going to be tough. So I think 10-2 is a very fair projection at this time. It's also January.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
let's see what we say in August when the official predictions come out. But I think right now, at first glance, 10-2 is realistic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It would be a step forward for the program.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I think 10-2 is definitely a realistic expectation for this team. And it'd be a fun one to cover, like you said, man. Not a ton of travel on your end, at least traveling far distances. So, I mean, it should be a relatively nice
unlike this basketball season.
Yeah, I know, man. So you've been
I've taken off and landed 36 times so far this football and basketball season.
That's unbelievable.
Flying in a pandemic, I think I'm an expert on it now.
Yeah, I better say you're a veteran when it comes to that, man. No doubt about it. But exactly, flexing your muscles over there. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this one up.
Not muscles. It's not plural. It's singular.
Muscle.
I'm down to one, man. I've hit the half-century mark. I'm down to one.
Oh, I love it, man. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. Just talked about the Carolina football schedule, 2021 schedule for the Tar Heels, and obviously we'll have off season, during the season, all the stuff that goes around the Carolina football covered at TarHeelIllustrated.com, and on our YouTube channel. So be sure to stay locked to both of those. As always, guys, if you enjoyed it, be sure to like this video, be sure to share it, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.